Good morning, everyone. Today we are going to be going over Pearl Harbor and how the United States was brought into World War II. This is going to be part two of early Axis aggression. We're going to focus more on Japan today. Yesterday we talked about how Hitler and Italy and the Axis expanded their powers in Europe and took over pretty much from Spain, the Spanish border, all the way into the Soviet Union. And by the end of 1940, uh, the Third Reich and the Axis controlled the vast majority of Europe. Well, if we take a look at the Pacific, Japan's empire by 1940 is going to be pretty much three times bigger than what the Nazis controlled. They're going to control islands all the way from Alaska, the Aleutians, Kiska and Attu, all the way down to Indonesia and South Pacific. So their empire is going to be huge. Japan wanted to create a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. And what that means is it's a very similar view to what the Nazis believed in Europe. They believed that they were a superior culture in Asia, where the Nazis believed that they were superior to most Europeans, that they were the Aryan race. The Japanese believe that they're superior. So, Japanese militarism, all right? By 1940, we're going to see a couple changes in Japan. Well, first of all, their emperor is only going to be really a figure of the state. He's going to have really no power. By 1940, this guy right here, he is going to become the prime minister. His name is Hideki Tojo, and he's going to be responsible for most of the policies of Japan throughout World War II. So, what do you need to be a militaristic power? Well, you need a strong military, obviously. You need to be able to support that military, and you need to be able to have supplies. You need metal, you need oil, you need to run your factories to make sure that you're producing weapons and making sure they're running. So let's just review what we talked about 2 weeks ago when we talked about early Japanese aggression. So Japan attacked Manchuria, a northern province of China, in 1931. This caused a whole chain of events to occur afterwards. So after attacking Manchuria, Japan is going to begin to move southward into China, and eventually they're going to move into French and British colonies in Southeast Asia. So by 1937, this really catches the attention of the United States. Though we're neutral, we're not picking sides. Um, we are following a policy of isolation. We are still going to condemn Japan for their actions. And since we were the number one supplier of their oil and scrap metal, we were going to apply economic sanctions, meaning we're going to cut off what we're supplying them because of their hostility in Asia. So we're not really getting involved. We're staying neutral, but we're saying, hey, we're not going to trade with you because of your actions and what you're doing, economic sanctions. So Japan really needs the oil from the United States. This is going to make Japan kind of change their strategy a little bit. They're going to have to become more aggressive in the Dutch East Indies where there is oil to try to obtain it. Eventually, they're going to try to attack Australia, parts of Burma, South Indochina, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, because of oil supplies there since the United States had cut them off. So Japan really felt that the United States was more of a thorn in the side. By 1940, Hideki Tojo, becomes the Japanese prime minister, and on December 7th, 1941, Japan invades Pearl Harbor. All right, Pearl Harbor is in the Hawaiian Islands. It's on the island of Oahu. So let's talk about this date, which is sometimes referred as a date which will live in infamy. December 7th, 1941. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt termed that phrase a date which will live in infamy because of the tragic events that had occurred. It's remembered because of the atrocities that happened. The Japanese surprise attacked us at one of our naval bases, and the death toll was pretty insurmountable. It's pretty bad. So the Japanese, the Pacific, the Pacific is very big. So for us, for the United States to detect where Japan was, where their Pacific fleet was almost impossible. So the Japanese fleet began to tune into the Honolulu radio station to locate as kind of like a honing beacon to find Hawaii. And they began to steamroll their way towards the Hawaiian Islands. And early on December 7th, people actually they spot a patrol ship in Hawaii or in Pearl, spots a mini sub, a spying Japanese sub. But there were so many false reports that nobody kind of took it seriously. Then early on, before the planes even arrive, these waves that arrive in Pearl are picked up by our radar station. That was our primitive type radar in 1941 right there. So we picked up the planes, but when they were located, they were said to be a flight of B-17s coming in from California, our own planes. So pretty much Japan, these planes were detected. It may have not been a surprise attack, but they still, we were not prepared. We did not believe it was the Japanese coming in to attack Pearl. So what happens? The three waves that attack from around 7 in the morning till around 1 in the afternoon cause mass devastation. All right. The Japanese bombers and fighters begin to immediately attack Battleship Row, where our ships were docked right here. All right, that big picture that you see on the left, Battleship Row, and they begin to sink our ships. Right, they attack Hickman and Wheeler Field, which were air bases on Pearl, so we couldn't get up in the air to fight the Japanese, and it was just a massive chaos and devastation. And this attack is going to cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet. So, in all, 2,400 Americans are killed. Most of these men that are killed are going to be killed on a ship called the Arizona, which was sunk and still lays at the bottom of Pearl Harbor. The Japanese were successful at destroying over 300 aircrafts, 21 ships that were pretty much either destroyed or out of commission for a long time. 3 waves of attacks lasted over 5 hours. One of the major errors Japan makes, however, is I don't know exactly how it happened or why it happened, but we had moved our aircraft carriers out to sea. They were not docked at Battleship Row. They were not docked at Pearl. So when the Japanese do attack, the aircraft carriers aren't there. These 21 battleships that were there, I don't want to say they were obsolete, meaning that they're not useful, but they were dry docked. They were more modern parts were being added to them because they were around for quite some time, since World War I. So Japan makes this fatal error. They attack the old ships that really are not of use to us at the time, but they don't attack the aircraft carriers, which obviously are more useful for modern warfare. And there you can see the Arizona, which was one of the ships that are sunk. Now, one thing that Japan underestimates is the ability of the United States to quickly regain its strength. We are a modern country, an industrial country, and we're going to be able to repair 18 of the 21 ships that were somewhat destroyed at Pearl. The Arizona, like I had mentioned, becomes a national landmark and lasting symbol of these attacks. And there's the Arizona today. You can take a ferry out right here to the Arizona and walk over it. You can lay either a rose or a wreath in the area right here. There's a picture of the Arizona leaving New York City when it was commissioned back in the 1920s. So now, one of the things about the Arizona is it does contain a lot of oil in its hull, and every couple seconds, a droplet of this oil does rise to the surface. And scientists say that this can turn into one of the worst ecological disasters if that hull busts open. So there's a problem today is not disturbing that grave site, but still worrying about how to get that the majority of that oil out of the hull of the Arizona and not have an oil spill at Pearl, where it would destroy marine life and all that. So the next day, FDR is going to ask Congress for a declaration of war. Remember, a president cannot declare war alone. He needs congressional approval. And this is pretty much going to be unanimous, a unanimous approval. So he delivers his speech. He says it's a date which will live in infamy. And we declare war on Japan. Now, if you remember, Japan since 1940 had the tripartite pact with Germany and Italy. So in turn, Italy and Germany now declare war on the United States. So Japan attacks Pearl Harbor December 7th. We declare war on Japan. And now we are also at war with Italy and Germany as well, in accordance to this tripartite pact. So the nation's at war. A couple things that happen afterwards. We begin to intern Japanese Americans. It's considered to be one of our worst civil rights violations of our time. President Roosevelt passes Executive Order 9066 and begins to move Japanese Americans to these internment camps. Ironically, no one that was Japanese was ever accused of spying or assisting Japan. And again, one thing that Japan did was they underestimated our industrial might. We were in the midst of a depression. We were not making weapons. We were not rearming like Germany, Italy, and Japan were in the 20s and 30s. After Pearl Harbor, we immediately switched our factories over from making refrigerators and consumer goods to airplanes, ships, tanks, and everything that is necessary for the war. There's a picture of Rosie the Riveter, who becomes a propaganda symbol to have women enter the workforce. Millions of men are entering the military in the United States and mobilizing. So women and elderly are going to be left in the factories to support the war and make sure that we have the materials that we need. So I hope you understand why Japan attacked Pearl